Welcome to the Angular and Tailwind CSS tutorial for beginners. Today I'll be showing you guys how to set up and create your own web app with Angular and style it with Tailwind CSS. Links to the resources and source code will be available down below in the description. Let's get started. First, you're going to want to make sure that you have Node.js successfully installed on your system. So if you know that you have not installed this before, navigate to nodejs.org and the link to this will again be down below in the description. Along with the download for Node, it's also going to include NPM, which is the package manager that we'll be using today. Next, go ahead and open your code editor of choice. Today, I'll personally be using Visual Studio Code, and here I'm going to go ahead and open the folder where I want to create this web application. So I'll go ahead and paste in my path, hit enter, and select that folder. Now I'm inside of the folder where I want to create this web application. So what I'll do here is open a new terminal, and down here navigate to this little downward caret icon and create a new command prompt, and I can close out of the PowerShell. First, I want to make sure that I do have Node installed, so I'll run a node-v, and if a version is showing up, that means you have Node successfully installed. And then I'll do the same thing for npm, and again, I have a version showing, so that means it is successfully installed. After verifying Node and npm are installed, we're going to run the command npm install -g for global @Angular/CLI. And what this is going to do is it's going to install the Angular CLI globally onto our system. But for me, I'm not going to run this command because I've already done this, so Angular CLI is already installed. But if this is your first time using Angular, go ahead and run this command. Now we want to make sure that it is successfully installed, so we'll run ng version to double check that the Angular CLI is installed on our system. And now it's showing Angular CLI here and the version down below, showing us that it is successfully installed on our computer. Next, we want to actually create our Angular application by running the command ng new, and then we can name our app whatever we want, but I'm going to go ahead and name it Angular-app just to keep it simple today. Next, it's going to ask us if we want to create a zoneless application. I'm going to say no, select CSS, and also say no to server-side rendering. Now it's going to go ahead and actually install and set up Angular for us within our newly created Angular-app directory, and you guys can already see some of the files and folder structure right here. This sometimes takes a second, so just be patient with it. Once our Angular application is created successfully, you'll see a green check mark followed by packages installed successfully, and inside of our new directory, you will see all of the files and folders in here for our Angular application. If you want to learn more about exactly what is going on here within an Angular web app, go ahead and check out the video up top and down below in the description where I break down everything you guys need to know. But for now, what we want to do is go ahead and run the command ng serve to actually start up our locally hosted web server where we can actually use our URL to view this on the front end browser. And now you guys can see I'm getting an error, and that's because I did not CD into my Angular-app directory here. Make sure you CD into your newly created directory, and I'll go ahead and run ng serve again. And now it will start up the locally hosted web server, and we'll be able to view this application in our browser. So right here, I'm going to say control and click on this. Now you guys can see all of the default code over here, and I'm a little bit zoomed in, so I'll go ahead and zoom out for you guys so we can view it in a normal size. But here inside of our browser, we can now see all of the default Angular application code. We're going to be removing all of this in a moment here and creating all of our own custom content. But this just lets us know that we successfully installed and set up our Angular application. Next, what we're going to do is navigate to tailwindcss.com right here. And again, this link will be available down below in the description. First, we want to navigate to docs, to framework guides, and scroll down and click on Angular. Here, the first step we already completed because we already created our project, so we'll go ahead and skip that for now. So we're going to go ahead and move on to step 2 right here, which is actually going to be the installation of Tailwind CSS. So I'll just copy this line of code, go back to Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to open a new command prompt. Make sure to cd into my Angular app directory, paste in that command here, and just go ahead and run it. It's going to give us a warning for the force, but don't worry about that. It's not going to cause any problems or mess anything up, so just leave it alone. Now you guys can see that it added 15 packages and it installed Tailwind CSS. To make sure this did install successfully, I'm going to navigate to my package.json, scroll down, and make sure that it says Tailwind CSS / post CSS and Tailwind CSS. And if you guys are wondering what version of Tailwind you have installed, it will also show you right here. So in my case, I'm using version 4.1. Obviously, if you're watching this later on in the future, it might be a newer version than this. Next, we need to go back to tailwindcss.com and continue on step 3. So we need to create a .postcssrc.json file. So I'll go ahead and copy this, go back to VS Code, and inside of the correct directory, of course, I'll go ahead and paste that in, hit enter, and all we need to do is go back here, copy this code, and then just paste it into this file like so. Then from here, we'll move on to step 4, and this one's pretty easy. All we need to do is import Tailwind CSS into our styles.css file. So we'll go back over here, open the src folder, navigate to the styles.css, and paste it right here. Back over here in the setup, what I'm going to do is go ahead and copy this trial piece of code right here to test and see if Tailwind is actually working. So what I'll do is go back to VS Code, open the app, go to app.html, and here it's going to have all the default code that we were just looking at inside of our live server or our browser tab. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and just select all of this and delete it because we don't need any of that default code. Paste in my h1 element with my Tailwind CSS styling. If we go back into our locally hosted URL, you guys are going to see here that our styling is not being applied. And that's because we actually need to stop and then restart our server. So I'm going to go back over here to where I started up my server, scroll all the way to the bottom, Control C to stop the server, and then run ngserve again to boot it back up. And then once it reboots, it will successfully apply our CSS styling from Tailwind. So back over here, you guys can now see that our Tailwind CSS styling is being successfully applied and it is working correctly. Now let's go back into a VS Code, and what I'm going to do is navigate to extensions over here on the left. And what I'm going to do is search for Tailwind CSS IntelliSense by Tailwind Labs here. If you haven't already, go ahead and install and enable this. And before we move on, I want to go ahead and scroll down to where it says installation. So down here, it's going to say, in order for the extension to activate, you must have Tailwind CSS installed, which we already completed, and one of these. So for version 4 and later, we need a CSS file that imports a Tailwind CSS style sheet, which we already successfully have here. But keep in mind, if you're using version 3 or earlier, you need to actually create a tailwind.config.whatever file for your particular build or whatever you're using to create your web application. But since we're using version 4 today, this is automatically going to work since we already imported it into our styles.css right here. And to make sure that this extension works, let's navigate to Manage, click on Settings, and search for the settings.json. We'll click this to go ahead and edit it. And up here, we need to make sure that Tailwind CSS.suggestions is set to true. If this is set to false, the extension will not work correctly. And if you guys aren't sure what version of Tailwind you installed, go back over here and up here in the top left of tailwindcss.com, it will have the version that you installed right here. And if you click this, you can select whatever version you want to use. So if you're using version 3, for example, here, just make sure you create that tailwind.config file to make sure that your extension works, because the extension is going to save you a lot of time when you're developing using Tailwind. So now I want to make sure that this extension actually works. So back in VS Code, I'll navigate back to my project, go back to the app.html, and up here within the class, I'm going to just try something like bg-blue, for example. And down here, you guys will see all of the recommendations directly from Tailwind CSS and all of the different shades of blue that we can use on our H1 element in this case. So this just makes it a lot easier to develop with Tailwind CSS, because instead of having to go back and forth between your code editor and tailwindcss.com, it just gives you everything you need right here. And for example, if I'm looking for flex, it will show up and give me all of the options related to flex. But for now, we don't need this H1 element, so I'll go ahead and just get rid of it. And now there's one more step that I need to take. Today, I'm actually going to be using a couple of CDNs. So what I'm going to do is, just to save some time, I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste them in. If you guys want to use a CDN, it's going to be placed directly into your index.html. So right here at the bottom of the head element, I'm just going to go ahead and paste in the CDN for Font Awesome 7. This will be available down below in the description. This is Font Awesome version 7, and I'm only going to be using a couple of icons from this today, but it just makes it easier because I don't have to create them from scratch or something. Below that, I'm also importing Google Fonts. So right here, I'm importing specifically the Playfair font from Google. The link to Google Fonts will also be available down below in the description if you want to select your own custom font. Now that I have those two CDNs imported, I'm going to navigate back to my styles.css, and under my import statement here, what I'm going to do is paste in a custom class called Playfair, and this is just directly from Google Fonts right here, so I can actually use the Playfair font. I'm just creating a custom class that I can use in any component throughout this application. So that's the good thing about these styles.css, is this is a global file. So if I put a class here, I can use it in any component that I create later on, even if it's a child component. And next, I want to make my web application completely responsive right off the bat. The thing I really enjoy about using Tailwind CSS is it sizes everything with rems, which is a relative unit, meaning I can make everything responsive for any device type a lot easier than if it used something like pixels. So here, all I need to do is go ahead and paste in some basic code. So this is going to be targeting the HTML element, and the font size is going to be 60% for mobile devices. Then for tablets or medium-sized devices, the font size is going to be 80%. And then for desktop and larger devices, the font size will be 100%. And don't get confused here, the font size does not only target font size, it targets the font size obviously, but also margin, padding, and anything that you use rems on. So it will make it completely responsive. Next, I want to go ahead and create the components that we're going to be using within this web application today. We're going to have 3 components just to keep it easy today. One for the navigation, one for the hero section, and one where we're going to put a grid where we're actually going to put some custom information that we're going to dynamically render out within that grid. So over here within our terminal, what we want to do is navigate back to the command prompt where we did not start up our locally hosted URL. And all I want to do here is run ng generate component, and I will start off with the Navbar component, and you guys can name these components whatever you want. Hit enter, and what that is going to do is Angular is automatically going to recognize what we're trying to do here, and it's going to create the Navbar folder with all of the files needed for our component right here. Then I'm going to go ahead and run this again, but this time I'm going to call it hero. You guys can see it displays over here. Then I'll run it one more time and I'll say stays. And that's going to be it. We just have 3 components today to keep it simple. And what you guys are going to notice is that if we navigate back to our locally hosted URL, nothing is displaying even though we created our components. What we need to do is actually import these components into our app. So I'll go ahead and minimize this and I'll open the navbar, select navbar.html just to show you guys what code is created in here right now. So you guys can see when we create a component, it just adds a basic paragraph element. It says the name of our component. In this case, it's the navbar, and then it says works. So what we want to do is actually display this on our front end. So what we need to do is navigate to the app.ts file here, and I can minimize this because we're not really going to be using the terminal anymore. And within imports here, I can remove the router outlet since we're not going to be using that today. And what I can do here is start typing out navbar, and VS Code will help me out. So I'll just select this one. So I need to import the navbar here and also make sure that this statement is up top. So sometimes VS Code is a little bit finicky, so just double check that this import statement is up at the top so this works correctly for you. Next, I'll do the same thing for the hero, and it imports up here. And lastly, I just need to import these stays, and it imports up here as well. So now that we have these imported into our app, we can use them. But first, I want to point out something important. I'm going to go back to the navbar, navigate to the navbar.ts, and up here at the top, you guys can see the selector. So this selector is what we're going to need to use within our app.html to render this component. So let's navigate back to the app.html, and I will go ahead and say app-navbar like so, hit enter, and you guys can see this is how we use our component. Some people get confused and they want to put only navbar, for example, but any component in Angular is going to require app-dash at the front of it. So now we'll navigate back to our live server, and you guys can see that navbar works is successfully displaying. Next, we just want to do the same thing, but for our hero component and our stays component. Now you guys can see everything is successfully rendering. All 3 of our components are displaying on the front end, which means we can actually start creating what we want to show now. And before we start using any Tailwind CSS classes, what I want to do is navigate back to tailwindcss.com. If you're new to Tailwind, right over here within the docs, if you use this little navigation bar, it's going to show you all of the classes that you can use from Tailwind. So for example, if I'm looking for Flex, I can scroll down, find Flex, and it will give me some examples and show me exactly how to use the Flex class from Tailwind CSS. And what I personally find the easiest when I'm developing on the fly is not going through all of this documentation. I like to use an AI tool like Google Gemini or ChatGPT. So if I'm looking for the grid class, for example, I can just go to Google and say grid Tailwind CSS, search for it, and then you guys will see it provides me the link to Tailwind CSS where grid is. And it's also going to give me an AI overview, and I can go ahead and use these classes by copying and pasting them into my own code. And it's also going to give an example just to break everything down. So for me personally, this is just the quickest way to find Tailwind classes on the fly without having to search through the documentation on tailwindcss.com. And again, you don't have to use Google Gemini like I am here. You can use ChatGPT or whatever you want just to speed up your development process a little bit. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and close out of this because I already know the classes I want to use for today. But if you're a beginner, I recommend you keep this open just in case you need it while you're developing, especially for the first couple times you're using Tailwind CSS. Now, just to simplify this, I'm going to move my locally hosted URL to the right and then my code editor over here to the left. And I'll go ahead and shrink this down a little bit. And I'm also going to zoom in so you guys can see exactly what we're doing here. And now we can navigate to the navbar.html and start actually creating our own custom content. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start off with a nav element here and add a class attribute. And I'm going to add the background dash white class, and you guys will see that our IntelliSense kind of takes a second to get going, especially when we're creating new elements. So you guys are going to notice that it did not show me a recommendation there, but if I back up, you guys will see that now it is showing. So sometimes there is a slight delay with the IntelliSense just because there's so many Tailwind classes. So if it's not working immediately for you, just be patient, give it some time, and it will work. Obviously, if you've been waiting probably for more than about a couple minutes, then there's probably an issue with how you set up the IntelliSense on your computer. So go back through my steps that I showed you guys and make sure everything is set up correctly. Next, I'm also going to add the shadow-medium class. And then within this nav, I'll go ahead and create a div with the class attribute, say max width is going to be 7XL. And the good thing about this is you guys might not know what these classes do, especially if you're developing for the first time. What you guys can do is go ahead and just hover over this class right here, and it will show you exactly what is going on and exactly what CSS style is being applied. So you guys can see right here, it shows us the rem and pixel value for this, which is really helpful because sometimes I honestly forget what some of these Tailwind classes do. So this helps remind me on the fly real quick without me having to search the internet or go to the documentation. Then I'm going to add a margin left and right of auto, padding left and right of 4. Next, I'm going to create a media query starting off with small, and this is going to change the padding left and right to 6. So if I go ahead and hover over this now, you guys can see exactly what is going on and exactly where this media query takes effect. So after this, I also want a large media query, and I'm going to change the padding left and right to 8 for larger devices. Here, I'll create another div and of course add the class attribute, and I'm going to make this a flex box, and I'm going to add justify between and a height of 16. And then I'm also going to add items center. Within this div, I'll create an anchor element with the class attribute, and right now this is not going to link anywhere, so I'll just put the hashtag symbol. Add the class of text extra large, font semi bold, and it looks like it's down here. And I'm going to make my text blue 600. And lastly, I want to use my custom class of Playfair to use my Google font. And inside of this, I'll create an icon element with a class attribute, and this is just going to be an icon from Font Awesome. If you guys want to view all the Font Awesome icons, I'll leave a link in the description where you guys can check out the icons you can use for your project. I'm going to go ahead and start off with FA-solid here, and I want to specifically use the plain icon. Now you guys can see it displaying here. Next, I'm going to go ahead and add my custom text of Velvet Getaways. You guys can see that text displaying like so. After that, I'm going to create another anchor element. And again, this is not going to link anywhere. And I'm going to include the text home. And I'm going to use the gray 700 color. And I also want to add a hover effect and change this to text gray 600. So now if I hover over this element, you guys will see the color change. But in my case, it's not very bold. So what I'm going to do is also go ahead and say font semi bold like so. And now you guys can see it a little bit better. And just to make this a little bit more noticeable, I'm actually going to change the hover effect to text blue 600. So you guys can see this now is a little bit more obvious, but it's still subtle. So that's going to be it for our navigation component. You guys can see that it came together really good and it looks legitimate. What I want to do now is go to the hero component and start developing that one. So I'll go to the hero.html and then minimize the Explorer over here. First, I want to get rid of this default paragraph element, and then I am going to be using an image here. So what I want to do is import a few images. So to do that inside of Angular, navigate to the public folder and just paste your images in right here. This is going to be where you put any images or favicons that you want to use throughout your application. And I'll minimize that. And in the hero.html, I'll start off with a section element with a class attribute, add the relative class, background cover, background center, and background no repeat. And I almost forgot a height of, mess that up, 70 VH, which is going to be 70% of our viewport height. Next, just to keep everything simple for today, I'm going to add an inline style, and this is just going to be for the background image. And here I'm just going to use URL, parentheses, quotation marks, and I want to specifically use an image from the public folder here. And since I'm using Angular today, it's going to know that it needs to pull the image from the public folder. So all we need to do here is go within these quotation marks, put a slash, and then our image like so, and it will automatically render, so we don't need to put anything before this slash right here, which just makes it a little bit easier and quicker when we're developing with Angular. Next, I'm going to create another div with a class attribute, make this relative, change the Z index to 10, make the height full, make this a flex box and change the direction to column, justify center, and items center. And these might look the same, but they're actually different. So justify center is going to be justify content, and item center is going to be align items. Then I'm going to specify text white, text center, going to add a padding left and right of 4. And within this div, I'll create an H1 element, paste in my text of Velvet Getaways, say text 4XL. Then I want to use some media queries here. So I'll say text 5XL. And then I want to use font bold and margin bottom of 4. Underneath this, we'll create a basic paragraph element. I'm going to paste in a basic catchphrase, say text large. Then for small, I'll say text extra large. Then a margin bottom of 6, a max width of 2XL. Then I'll create an anchor element with a class attribute, and this again is not going to link to anything for now. And I'll say book now. Then we're basically going to style this anchor element like a button. So what I'll do here is add the background blue 600 class, add a hover effect to change the background to blue 700, add a padding left and right of 6 and padding top and bottom of 3. Make our corners rounded with rounded large and transition. If I can spell that correctly, and I'll just select it right from here. So now you guys can see we have our button displaying right here. You guys will notice that it's kind of hard to read this text against our background. So what I'm going to do is before our first div, I'm going to create one more div, change this to absolute, say inset 0, background black, /40 so we can see through it a little bit. And now you guys can see we have a little bit of a gray overlay. You guys can customize this however you want. Like if I put 80 here, it's going to be a little darker, but I'm happy with 40. So now we can actually read this text a little bit better. Now we are done creating our navigation and our hero section. What we're going to do is move on and create our last component for today. In this, we're actually going to be setting up a grid with Tailwind CSS that is going to be completely responsive and dynamic by the time we're done. So let's navigate to our Explorer and go to our stays component, select stays.html. Then I'll minimize this, delete our default code here, create a section with the class attribute, say max width 5XL, and an automatic margin with a padding top and bottom of 5. Next, I'll create an H2 element, paste in some text, say text 2 extra large, text center, margin of 10, and our custom Playfair class. Underneath that, I'll create a div where we're going to set up our grid, and I will say here, grid, add a gap of 6, and then we can make this responsive with our Tailwind media queries, starting with small. We'll say grid calls to, And then we'll do one for medium where our grid calls will be 3. And again, you guys can see exactly where these media queries take place. And lastly, we're going to add a margin of 4. Here I'll create another div, say background white, rounded, extra large, shadow of medium, and then we'll also add overflow hidden. Next, we'll create an image element, and for the src, I'm going to put slash, go ahead and select one of my images. I'll just use this Cozumel JPEG, so I'll go ahead and copy this and just go ahead and paste it in right here, and you guys will see that image successfully displaying now. Minimize this, and I'm just going to add image for our alt text for now. And then underneath this image, what we want to do is create another div, say a padding of 4, and within this I'll create an h3 element, hotel name for now, and then add text large. Underneath this I'll create a paragraph element with a class attribute, and for now I'll just add location as the text, say text small, and then text gray 500. Then we got another paragraph element coming up here that will hold the description, and we're going to add text gray 600 and a margin top of 2. Underneath that I'll create another div element, add a margin top of 3, create a flex box, and say justify between and items center. Within this div, I'll create a span element, put a $sign and just say price for now, add text blue 600 and a font of bold. You guys can see that displaying below. Then we're going to want another span element. I'm going to go ahead and add in this little custom icon, and then I'm going to say rating, and this is going to be text yellow 500. Lastly, for our card here, we want to create a button element, say book now, and then we're going to add background blue 600, hover background blue 700, and padding left and right of 6 with a padding top and bottom of 3. Rounded large corners, so I'll say rounded dash large. We're almost there, guys, I promise. Followed by transition. I don't know why this looks like this. This just needs to be rounded large right here. Followed by rounded large corners, transition, margin top of 3, text white, and end this off with cursor pointer. So I'll type this out so it'll pop up. And we are done with our button. And I'm also going to make the text bold here. I'll say font, I'll go with semi-bold so it's not too annoying. So here that makes it a little bit better. You guys can see our cards successfully set up. But at this point, you guys will realize that we're only displaying one card right here. And just to keep the video basic today, I'm only going to have 3 cards within this component right here, just to keep it simple for now. And what we can do is we can copy this individual item right here like so and paste it down below 2 more times. But the problem here is we're hard coding in the values at this point, and that's not what we want to do since we're using Angular. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and remove these bottom 2 card elements, and we're just going to be left with this one. And what we're going to do is move on to actually dynamically displaying information within our grid here. So what we're going to do is navigate to the stays.ts so we can start actually creating our array. So here we're just going to create a basic array called hotels. And we're going to make this equal to an empty array. And this array is going to house a number of different objects. In our case, we're only going to have 3 since we only want to display 3 different getaways down below here. So within this first object, what I'm going to do is set up a unique ID and make sure this value is unique in each one of your objects. Set up a name, and this is just going to be the string value of Ocean View Resort, and then the ID is obviously just an integer value. Then we'll say location. This is again going to be a string value, and this is going to be the Maldives. Set up a basic description here, and again, it's just a little basic string value. After that, we'll say price per night, and it's going to be 350 in an integer value. And then we're going to set up our image URL here, and this needs to be a string value. And again, we just need to use the slash followed by the name of our image here. And lastly, I will also include a rating as a floating point number here. And at this point, I'm going to want 2 more objects. So what I'll do is just go ahead and paste it in. It's following the same format as the first one we just created. Just again, make sure that you have a unique ID value for each item. And this is going to make it easier because every time we want to add or delete something from our getaways, we can just come in here and edit this array. So now we're done with the TypeScript file here. We can navigate back to the stage.html, and what I'm going to do is show you guys how to loop through data and display it on the front end dynamically, the newest and most updated way with Angular. There's a few other ways to do it, and it's not technically wrong, but some of the other methods out there that people still use are just outdated at this point. So the most up-to-date way of doing this is saying @for, and this is going to operate basically like a normal for loop in JavaScript, for example. And what we want to do is say hotel of hotels. So notice what's going on here is we're actually using the hotels array from our TypeScript file right here, and then we're looping through each individual object and storing it in hotel for each iteration of the loop. So for the first iteration of the loop, we're going to only use the information from this object within our array. And the way this works in Angular is we also need to track a unique value. So we'll specify track and we'll say hotel.id. So that's why I was stressing that these need to be unique values, because if you're not tracking a unique value right here, it's going to cause an issue with this loop. And just like in something like JavaScript, we also need to use our curly braces. And I actually put this in the wrong place. This actually needs to go within our grid. So I'll go ahead and place it within this first div in our stage.html. And I can go ahead and get all of this code, cut it, and just place it within my curly braces like so. And so now you guys are going to notice that we do have 3 items here, but it's not actually rendering anything out dynamically because I still have these values hard-coded in here. So what we need to do is start off with the image, and since we're dynamically rendering this, we need to wrap the src inside of square brackets, and then we want to point to the hotel.image URL. So basically we're getting each individual object from our stage.ts and getting the image URL and displaying it dynamically for each item here. And you guys can see that each one is displaying correctly now. So we're basically going to follow that same format moving into the alt here, but what we need to do is actually wrap this inside of double curly braces, say hotel.name, and then we're going to use this again for the hotel.name right here. So we'll just go ahead and paste it in. And now you guys can see that the name of each stay or getaway is showing up correctly. And for the location, what I'm going to do is the same thing, but now I want to actually grab the location, for example. And then we'll do that again for the description and just specify description. And then again for the price, but you want to make sure that you leave the $sign here. Don't mess with that. And we'll just say price per night. Then after this, I want to actually say /night so people understand that it's per night. Then we'll do this again down here, leave this little star icon and just say rating. And now you guys can see that I actually made a mistake. My second image here is actually distorted because I forgot to add the classes to my image element. So what I'll do is go ahead and add class here, say width full height of 48 and object cover. And now you guys will see that my images are a little bit smaller and none of them are distorted. And let me change this to something a little bit bigger. I'll change this to 60 just to make the images a little bit bigger and pop a little bit more. And we are almost done. This is officially going to be the last step. So what I want to do is make sure that each description is the same length. So what I'll do is navigate to hotel.description, and within my curly brackets, I'm going to go ahead and add in a pipe and say slice 0 and 40. And you guys are going to see that we're getting an error here because I actually need to import the slice pipe. So I'll go over here, navigate to my imports, type in slice pipe, make sure this import statement is added here, and now it will go ahead and work correctly. And what this is going to do is after 40 characters, it's going to cut off the rest of the description. But now you guys can see it kind of looks a little bit weird. So what I'll do is add some basic logic at the end of this. So this is going to be separate, and I'll just say hotel.description. And I'll say if this is greater than 40, I want to put 3 dots at the end. And if it's not greater than 40, I don't want to do anything. So I'll just put an empty string. And I need to say description.length. And now it will work correctly. So after 40 characters, it will add 3 dots successfully, which doesn't look as ugly anymore. So now we're completely finished with our Angular application. We got our navigation bar, our hero section, and our responsive and dynamic grid down below. So if I go ahead and make this full screen view, you guys will see that we have 3 columns, and then I'll go ahead and inspect this, go into responsive view, scroll down, and as I shrink this, you guys are going to see that it turns into 2 columns and then 1 column for mobile devices. And this is completely responsive. Congratulations, you just created a custom web application using Angular and Tailwind CSS. Keep in mind, we zoomed in the browser earlier on in today's video, so I'll go ahead and change this back to 100%. And now you guys can see our entire web application showing up with our navigation and our dynamic and responsive grid. If you guys run into any problems or have any questions, do not hesitate to reach out to me through the comments down beneath this video. Again, links to the source code and resources that I used today will be available below in the description. I really appreciate you guys watching, and I'll see you guys soon in another video.